and the night was heavy, the kind that seemed to press down on every surface, every sound, every shadow. I remember driving along the winding roads of upstate New York, the tires of my old sedan crunching over gravel when I first saw the mansion. It rose abruptly from the mist, a jagged silhouette against the blackened sky. Its walls were an eerie gray, streaked with what looked like decades of rain and decay, and the windows, tall and narrow, reflected the faint moonlight like eyes observing, judging, waiting. No streetlights illuminated the road. Only the occasional flash of lightning hinted at the mansion's true size. It was enormous, with more turrets and chimneys than I could count, some of them broken or leaning, like they were about to topple. The gate was wrought iron, twisted into elaborate patterns that looked almost organic, as though something had grown over time rather than been built. As I pulled up, the gravel crunched louder, echoing unnaturally in the heavy air. I didn't know why I felt drawn to it. Curiosity, probably, mixed with a thrill of unease I couldn't shake. The locals had warned me, "Don't go near that place," one old man in the diner had muttered, voice low, eyes darting to the window like the mansion itself might be listening. The Ellsworth estate? Dangerous, cursed, or worse, watched. I laughed it off at first, thinking about my podcast. Real estate mysteries had always been my niche, a way to dig into history while spinning stories for listeners. But this place, there was something different. The front door was enormous, made of blackened oak, with brass handles dulled by decades of neglect. I paused, hand hovering over the cold metal, and then it clicked. The door opened before I could knock. Not with a push, not with a creak, but as if it had been waiting for me. A gust of cold air rushed out, carrying with it the smell of wet stone and old wood. I stepped inside, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the darkness. The interior was breathtaking and terrifying at once. Dust hung in the air like a fog, disturbed only by my movement. The walls were paneled in dark wood, carved with intricate patterns of vines and flowers. Some designs so detailed that I could imagine them growing over the years. Portraits lined the walls, their eyes following me in ways that made my skin crawl. I recognized the style mid-1800s, oil on canvas, but there was something off about the faces. They weren't quite right, as if the painter had captured more than just a likeness. One woman's eyes seemed almost wet, glistening in the flashlight beam, and a child's expression twisted into a subtle grimace I couldn't look away from. The hallway stretched out ahead, grand yet ominous. I could see a sweeping staircase curving upward, its banister polished to a dull sheen, and the carpets were threadbare, faded reds and golds with patterns that had lost their clarity over decades. I walked carefully, every step a whisper on the floorboards. Somewhere deep in the house, a door slammed, and I jumped. My breath came quick, uneven. I wasn't alone. As I explored, I began to notice the small things. The house wasn't just old. It was alive in its decay. A sudden draft made a chandelier swing, the crystals tinkling softly. A picture frame tilted on the wall for no reason, then corrected itself when I blinked. In the corner of a room, a chair seemed slightly out of place, angled as if someone had been sitting there moments before I arrived. My rational mind fought to keep me grounded, whispering that it was just the wind, settling wood. An old house breathing, but every fiber of my being told me this place had secrets. I found the library, massive and suffocating. Floor-to-ceiling shelves sagged under the weight of old tomes, their spines cracked, titles faded. Dust motes floated like tiny spirits in the flashlight beam. I ran my fingers along one shelf and noticed something odd, a book slightly out of line. Leather-covered deep red, embossed with a symbol I didn't recognize. I pulled it free. The pages were brittle, written in a mixture of English and something older, something jagged, almost runic. I flipped through, heart pounding, until I found a section underlined in faded ink. The watchers never sleep. The walls remember. Do not enter after dusk. A shiver ran down my spine. I dropped the book onto a nearby table. Its thud deafening in the silence. Footsteps echoed above me. Slow, deliberate, heavy. I froze. The air grew colder, and the smell of decay intensified, like something long dead breathing just beyond my perception. I whispered into the darkness. Hello? No answer, only silence, and yet I felt eyes on me, unseen, measuring, waiting. I climbed the staircase, each step groaning under my weight. At the top, the hallway split, twisting in ways that didn't seem entirely logical. Doors opened into rooms that felt impossibly large, their ceilings disappearing into shadow. In one room, a massive four-poster bed dominated the space, the fabric canopy tattered, cobwebs clinging to the corners. On the nightstand lay a journal, leather cracked, clasp broken. I opened it, reading the first entry, April 14, 1892. They say the house is cursed. I hear them at night. The servants whisper of shadows moving without shape, voices behind walls. Father insists it is nonsense. I do not. Another entry, hurried, almost frantic. May 2nd. The walls are listening. I cannot sleep. Even the mirrors betray me. Last night, I saw a figure in the hall, but when I ran to it, nothing was there. Father tells me it is imagination. He is blind to what we cannot see. I put the journal down. A sound made me spin, a faint scratching, like nails on wood, coming from the far end of the hall. My flashlight trembled in my grip. Who's there? I called, voice barely above a whisper. No reply. The scratching grew louder, echoing off the walls, circling around me, then abruptly stopping. Silence returned, thicker this time, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Then, I saw it, a shadow, slinking along the fore wall, impossible in shape, elongated, twisting. Almost human, but not. My breath caught. I blinked, and it was gone. Just the hall, empty, silent, as if nothing had ever moved there. I stepped forward, hand on the wall, feeling the cold stone beneath my fingers. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. Yet I moved further in, drawn by the curiosity that had brought me here. In the next room, a piano sat covered in dust. Keys yellowed. I pressed one. A sound, brittle and broken, echoed through the mansion. Then another, and another. The notes didn't form a melody, but a sequence like a message. I stopped, listening, realizing the tempo mimicked footsteps. They were coming closer. My heart raced. I spun toward the doorway, but the hall behind me was empty. I didn't understand it. Yet, the house seemed to respond to me. Walls groaned as if alive, and the portrait's eyes followed every movement. Whispers, so soft I could barely catch them, drifted from every corner. Leave, leave. But something compelled me to stay, to see, to know. I stumbled into a dining hall, vast and empty. Long tables set, as if a grand feast had been interrupted. Silverware tarnished, plates cracked, candles melted into grotesque shapes. In the fireplace, ashes had formed words. They watch, always. I stepped back, and the floorboards creaked not under my weight, but under something else. A presence, something unseen. The air grew colder still, frost forming on the edges of the windows. I wanted to turn back, but my eyes caught movement at the far end. A figure, blurred, shadowed, barely discernible, standing in the corner. It tilted its head, watching me. I felt a pulse in the room, a rhythm I couldn't explain. Then, just as suddenly, the figure vanished, leaving nothing but emptiness and the lingering sense of being followed. By the time I reached what must have been the main hall again, dawn's first light was creeping over the horizon. The mansion loomed large in the dim light, silent, patient, like it had been waiting all along. I knew I couldn't leave, not yet. There were stories here, secrets, and someone watching every step I took. The mansion seemed quieter now, but that was only a trick. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating, like it was waiting for me to make a mistake. I had spent the night wandering, flashlight in hand, notebook open, jotting down observations. Every detail seemed important, though my rational mind screamed at me that I was losing grip on reality. The library, the piano, the strange journals, they were all calling me deeper, pulling me into the mansion's twisted heartbeat. I decided to explore the West Wing, a part of the mansion I hadn't reached the night before. The hallway leading there was narrow, lined with more portraits. But these faces were different, harsher, sharper, with eyes that seemed hollow yet piercing. Some had smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Others stared blankly. But when I shifted my flashlight, it felt like their gaze followed me across the room. I shivered and pressed forward, ignoring the gnawing in my chest that told me to leave. At the end of the hall, a pair of double doors stood tall, carved with symbols similar to those in the red book I had found earlier. I hesitated, hand hovering over the knob. The air felt thicker here, heavier, almost tangible. I turned the knob slowly. The doors creaked open to reveal a long corridor, dimly lit by the faint light from broken windows above. Dust swirled in the air, and the smell of old wood and mildew was overpowering. The corridor stretched endlessly, or so it seemed. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, as if the mansion had swallowed my sound and then thrown it back at me. Every door along the corridor was closed, each more elaborate than the last, some with locks that looked centuries old. I noticed markings carved into the wood near the handles, simple at first, just lines and scratches. But as I progressed, they became intricate, almost runic, like the ones in the journal. Suddenly, I heard it, a faint whispering. I froze. It wasn't coming from a single source. The voices seemed to be everywhere, just behind the walls, behind the doors. They spoke in tones I couldn't understand, words that didn't make sense. Yet, they filled the corridor with a dreadful rhythm. I strained to hear, heart hammering in my chest, flashlight shaking. The whispering stopped abruptly. In that silence, I could hear my own breathing, the pounding of my pulse, the soft creak of the floorboards beneath me. Then a single door at the very end of the corridor began to open slowly, without a sound, just a subtle movement. A shadowy figure appeared for a fraction of a second, a woman in a long, flowing dress, face obscured by darkness, and then she vanished. I stumbled forward, compelled to investigate. Every rational thought fled. There was a pull I couldn't explain, a fascination mixed with dread. I reached the door and stepped inside. The room was vast, circular, with a domed ceiling painted with a mural that had long since faded, though I could still make out angels, faces, and figures frozen in motion. Dust covered the floor, but there were fresh footprints leading to a massive fireplace. In the center of the room stood a mirror, enormous, framed in twisted black iron. I approached it slowly, heart racing, noticing that the reflection wasn't quite right. I raised my flashlight to it, and my reflection moved slightly out of sync with my real movements. My breath caught. The reflection smiled when I didn't. I took a step back. A sound like glass breaking echoed from behind me. I spun round. The room was empty, but the smell of something burnt lingered. The mirror now had cracks running across its surface, jagged, spiderweb patterns. Though I hadn't touched it, I touched my face, heart thundering. And that's when I noticed the reflection in the mirror wasn't just me. Behind me, in the reflection, stood a man I didn't recognize. Tall, shadowed, with eyes too dark to see clearly. I turned around. Nothing. The room was empty. I backed out of the room slowly, the whispering beginning again, this time more urgent, more coherent. Leave, leave, leave. The voice seemed to reverberate inside my head, inside the walls, inside the mansion itself. And then came footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching from the hallway. I didn't know whether to run or stay frozen. The footsteps grew louder, echoing in a rhythm that matched my own heartbeat. I ran, blindly, down the corridor, doors slamming shut behind me as if the house itself were closing in. Shadows twisted along the walls, forming shapes that were almost human, almost alive. I reached the main hall, panting, the early morning light creeping through the windows, softening the darkness just enough to see. But the sense of being watched didn't leave. In the center of the hall, I noticed something new, a trapdoor in the floor, previously hidden beneath a tattered rug. I knelt, hesitant, and lifted it. A staircase led down into blackness. The air from below smelled damp, musty, and carried a faint metallic tang. I knew I shouldn't go down, but I had come this far. Something about the mansion demanded I continue. The stairs descended steeply, spiraling into a basement that felt impossibly deep. My flashlight caught glimpses of old furniture, broken chests, and piles of papers scattered across the floor. Cobwebs hung thickly from the ceiling, brushing my face as I moved. Then I saw them boxes, stacked neatly, labeled with names I recognized from the portraits upstairs. The Ellsworth family, letters, journals, personal effects, all meticulously preserved. I opened one of the boxes. The letters inside were frantic, describing events that sounded impossible, figures appearing in mirrors, voices in the walls, shadows moving independently. One letter, dated June 1895, read, "They are in the walls. They do not sleep. Even the servants fear them. I hear whispers through the floorboards. They know what I think, what I see, what I feel. God help me. A sudden noise made me jump. A loud thud from above, followed by a dragging sound. I shone my flashlight toward the staircase. A figure was descending, slowly, carefully, face obscured. My voice caught in my throat as I whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. Just the dragging, deliberate steps coming closer. I backed toward the far corner of the basement, heart racing, mind screaming to leave. The air grew colder. Frost formed on the edges of boxes and papers. Shadows seemed to move along the walls, closer, almost reaching for me. Then, silence. I dared to look up. The staircase was empty. No figure. Nothing but the oppressive darkness above. My hands shook, flashlight trembling, and in that instant, I realized something terrifying. The mansion didn't just watch. It interacted. It responded. It was alive, and I was in its center. I spent what felt like hours in the basement, though it might have been only minutes. The air was heavy, carrying the weight of years of secrets, dust, and something darker, something that could not be named. My flashlight flickered as I moved from box to box, each revealing more about the Ellsworth family than any public record could have told. Letters, journals, and scraps of paper, some written in a hurried, trembling hand, described events that seemed impossible, disappearances, whispered voices, shadows that moved independently of the people who cast them. One journal stood out, bound in black leather, its edges worn and pages brittle. Opening it, I read entries from the last known heir of the Ellsworth estate, a man named Thomas Ellsworth, dated 1912. The handwriting was frantic, jagged, each word a struggle against fear. They have eyes everywhere, even in the walls, even in the furniture. I thought I was imagining it, but no, I hear them whispering my thoughts. I have locked every door, every window, but it doesn't matter. They are patient. They wait, and I cannot leave. The house does not allow it. The more I read, the colder the basement became. My breath fogged in front of me. A sound, soft at first, then growing louder, drew my attention upward. A low, almost inaudible hum, like a chant, echoing through the walls above. The basement seemed to vibrate with it, the floor beneath my feet subtly moving, like the house itself was breathing. Suddenly, I noticed a small door at the far end of the basement, partially hidden behind a pile of crates. It was wooden, unremarkable, yet I felt compelled to approach it. The air near the door was colder, carrying the metallic scent of old blood and earth. I knelt, brushing away cobwebs, and found a brass handle, cold as ice. As I turned the handle, a faint voice whispered my name, or at least it sounded like it. My heart lurched. The door creaked open to reveal a narrow passage, winding downward into absolute darkness. The walls were damp, covered in moss and strange carvings that glimmered faintly in my flashlight's beam. Symbols similar to those I had seen in the red book covered the stones, etched deep into the rock. Some seemed almost alive, pulsating subtly as though they were breathing. I stepped inside cautiously, each footstep sending echoes back that sounded like whispers. The air grew heavier, thick with the smell of decay. The passage twisted, turning so sharply I lost any sense of direction. And then I saw it, a faint glow ahead, pulsing like a heartbeat. Drawn to it, I moved closer, flashlight trembling. The passage opened into a cavernous chamber. its ceiling disappearing into darkness. The glow emanated from a circle on the floor, ancient symbols etched into the stone, filled with a substance that shimmered unnaturally. Round the circle lay objects, old rings, broken mirrors, tiny dolls, all ranged with careful precision. It was a ritual space, of that there could be no doubt. The air hummed with energy, the vibrations making the hairs on my arms stand on end. I stepped closer, and then the chanting began again, louder this time, surrounding me. The shadows on the walls moved, elongating, twisting, forming shapes that were almost human. I felt pressure on my chest, like invisible hands were holding me down. Panic surged, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the circle dot in the center of the circle. A figure began to form, not solid, but a shadow coalescing into the shape of a man. His eyes glowed faintly, a pale, eerie light. I stumbled back, tripping over an old crate. My flashlight fell, rolling toward the circle, its beam catching the figure's face. It was Thomas Ellsworth, or what remained of him, trapped between life and something else entirely. His lips moved, but no sound came. Then, suddenly, the figure lunged not at me, but toward the glowing symbols. The air erupted with a deafening sound, like glass shattering, stone cracking, and whispers screaming all at once. I covered my ears, heart pounding, mind reeling. When I dared to open my eyes, the figure was gone. The circle, however, remained, pulsing softly, waiting. I staggered to my feet, realizing something terrifying. The mansion was not just haunted, it was alive, and the Ellsworth family's dark obsession had bounded with rituals, whispers, and bloodlines. The house remembered, acted, and punished. I wasn't just a visitor, I had become part of its story. With trembling hands, I returned to the basement stairs. Each step upward felt heavier, as if the house was reluctant to let me leave. Shadows shifted around me, whispers following. I reached the main hall again, the dawn light barely touching the corners of the room. Everything seemed still, almost normal, yet I knew better. And then I heard it, a voice, distinct this time, soft but clear. Return, or be claimed. My blood ran cold. I froze, staring at the walls, the ceiling, the windows. The mansion had spoken directly to me, and somehow I knew it wasn't a threat I could ignore. The mansion seemed to settle after my terrifying encounter in the basement, but I knew better than to trust it. The air was still thick, heavy with anticipation, like the house itself was holding its breath. Every shadow in the corners of the hallways, every creak of the floorboards, felt purposeful now. I had crossed a threshold. I wasn't just exploring a decaying estate. I had entered a living labyrinth of history, obsession, and something far darker. I returned to the library, hoping the old books would provide some clarity. My flashlight cut narrow beams through the dust-laden air, illuminating shelves of forgotten knowledge. The red book I had found earlier sat prominently on a table, almost as if waiting for me. I picked it up, and the symbols inside seemed to vibrate softly under my fingertips, pulsing like a heartbeat. Flipping through, I found a map tucked between the pages, drawn with meticulous care. It detailed the mansion's layout, not just the rooms I had seen, but hidden passageways, secret staircases, and chambers that defied conventional architecture. I followed the map, flashlight in hand, stepping cautiously into corridors I had never noticed before. The mansion's design was a maze, hallways folding back on themselves, doors leading to walls, and staircases that seemed to descend forever before curving upward again. I felt disoriented, yet strangely guided, as if the house wanted me to find something. At the end of a narrow passage, I found a door unlike any other. Blackened wood, etched with strange markings, a faint hum emanating from behind it. The handle was warm, almost alive. I hesitated, then turned it, stepping into a room that smelled of earth and decay. The floor was dirt, uneven, as if I had entered a tomb. Along the walls, alcoves held jars filled with substances I could not identify, some glowing faintly, others dark and viscous. Candles, long burned down to stubs, were arranged in precise patterns. Surrounding a dais in the center. And on the dais lay a chest, small, ornate, but emanating an energy I could feel even without touching it. I approached slowly. The air grew colder, breath visible as fog, and a whisper brushed past my ear. "Open it." My hands shook as I lifted the lid. Inside were letters, photographs, and a bundle of personal items belonging to the Ellsworth family. But the most striking object was a locket, tarnished with age, yet somehow gleaming under the faint light. I opened the locket. Inside was a tiny portrait of a young woman, her expression serene, eyes looking straight at me, piercing, alive. A chill ran through me. The moment I looked, I felt a presence behind me. I spun, flashlight catching nothing, yet the sense of being watched was overwhelming. Whispers surrounded me, voices overlapping, urgent, almost pleading. "You must know. You must remember." I returned to the main hall, locket in hand, trying to piece together the fragments of history I had uncovered. The mansion seemed calmer now, but the calm was deceptive. Every room I passed through felt as though it remembered my movements, marking me, cataloging me. Shadows shifted as if acknowledging my presence, waiting for me to understand their story. I made my way to the dining hall, where the long table still bore remnants of a feast long decayed. The fireplace glimmered with faint embers, though no fire burned. I placed the locket on the table, studying it carefully. The young woman in the portrait reminded me of someone I had seen in the faded photographs in the basement, in the journals, in the haunting murals above the domed ceiling. And then it hit me. She was the key to understanding the mansion's secrets. I spent hours going through letters, piecing together the family's story. The Ellsworths were not just a wealthy lineage, they were guardians of the mansion, bound by ritual and bloodline to protect something, though what it was remained elusive. Thomas Ellsworth's journal revealed it all. The family had performed ceremonies to bind spirits, preserve knowledge, and maintain control over forces beyond human comprehension. The mansion itself was a living entity, created and maintained through generations of obsession and fear. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from above. My heart jumped. Footsteps, heavier this time, pounded through the floorboards. Shadows moved along the walls, swirling like smoke. I raced upstairs, the locket clutched in my hand, flashlight beam bouncing wildly. In the main hall, the portraits seemed to warp, faces stretching and twisting, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The mansion was reacting to my discovery. It knew. I ran toward the grand staircase, drawn by a sense of urgency I couldn't explain. As I reached the top, A door at the far end of the hall slowly opened. Light spilled from within, but it was unnatural, almost golden, illuminating the corridor in a way that made shadows dance violently. I stepped inside. The room was vast, circular, with a high-vaulted ceiling. In the center, a pedestal held a book, enormous, bound in black leather, with strange symbols that seemed to writhe under my gaze. This was the culmination of everything: the family's secrets, the mansion's power, the rituals that bound it. I approached, the air thick with anticipation. The whispers were deafening now, urgent, pleading, commanding. I opened the book. Pages filled with meticulous handwriting revealed rituals, invocations, and accounts of events that defied reality. There were instructions for communicating with the mansion itself, for binding spirits, for unlocking hidden chambers. The last entry, written in a hand I recognized from the locket's photograph, chilled me to the bone. The mansion watches, and it waits. Only those who understand the bloodline may survive. The house remembers, the house judges, and it will not forgive the unworthy. As I closed the book, the room shook violently. Shadows rose from the floor, walls, and ceiling, twisting into forms both human and inhuman. I ran, stumbling back into the hall, locket clutched tightly, book under my arm. The mansion groaned, doors slamming, windows shattering, as if protesting my intrusion. And then I heard it, a voice clear above the chaos. "You are one of us now, whether you will or not." The words echoed through every room, every corridor, every shadow. I realized, with a cold certainty, that I had crossed a threshold. The mansion's story was no longer history, it was my reality, and it was far from over. The morning light had long since fled, swallowed by the mansion's oppressive darkness. I realized, with a weight that pressed on my chest, that time here was distorted. Hours could have been days, or minutes stretched into eternities. Every room, every shadow, every whisper reminded me that I was no longer a visitor. I was part of the mansion's living story, a chapter being written in real time, and it didn't forgive hesitation. I returned to the circular room with the pedestal, book in hand, locket clutched tightly. The air was electric, humming with energy I could feel in my bones. Shadows moved along the walls, pulsating, as if alive. I realized then that the mansion had a rhythm, a heartbeat, and that heartbeat synchronized with mine, racing faster and faster. The whispering grew louder, voices overlapping, a chaotic symphony of fear, warning, and command. "You belong. You belong." I opened the book again, scanning pages frantically. Instructions, diagrams, symbols. It was as if something had left these directions specifically for me. The mansion itself seemed to anticipate my thoughts, guiding me towards some hidden truth. One diagram showed a hidden chamber beneath the main hall, accessible only through a trapdoor I had discovered earlier. The ritual described required not just items, but my presence, my choices, my very will to survive. I knew I had no choice. I descended the trapdoor again, the stairs winding endlessly into darkness. The basement was quieter than before, but the air felt thick, alive, watching. Shadows shifted as I passed, stretching and twisting unnaturally. I followed the map from the red book, careful not to miss a single mark, until I reached a small, iron-bound door at the far end. Cold air spilled out from beneath it. The mansion seemed to hum with anticipation, every wall vibrating, every floorboard trembling. I opened the door. The chamber beyond was unlike anything I had seen, a cathedral of stone beneath the mansion. Walls lined with ancient tomes, candles, and artifacts that pulsed with energy. In the center, a massive sigil was etched into the stone floor, glowing faintly. It radiated heat and cold simultaneously, an impossible paradox that made my head spin. I stepped forward cautiously. Then, the shadows rose. Figures, semi-transparent, humanoid but distorted, began forming around the room. Whispers became voices, chanting in a language I didn't understand, yet comprehended instinctively. The locket in my hand burned hot against my skin, guiding me, almost commanding me. I realized the mansion, the Ellsworths, the rituals, they were all about control. This place wasn't just haunted. It was sentient. It could manipulate reality, bend perception, and claim those who trespassed too far. The first figure moved toward me, a woman in the style of the portrait in the locket. Her eyes glowed faintly, almost pleading. I instinctively lifted the locket. The figure paused, its form flickering. The whispers intensified. Choose, choose, choose. I realized that the mansion was giving me an option, a test. Survival wasn't guaranteed. It demanded understanding, awareness, and resolve. I glanced around. Symbols on the floor matched diagrams in the book. Candles aligned with the cardinal directions. The locket pulsed in time with the mansion's heartbeat. I understood then this was not just ritual. It was navigation. I had to follow the mansion's instructions perfectly, or risk becoming one of the shadows. Trapped forever, a prisoner of its dark design. I placed the locket at the center of the sigil. The glow intensified, blinding. The shadows recoiled, their whispers turning into screams. The floor vibrated violently. I closed my eyes, listening, letting instinct guide me. The book's diagrams ran through my mind, specific steps, sequences, movements. One wrong motion could be fatal. I moved deliberately, tracing lines on the floor, lighting candles in order, speaking words from the book aloud despite the fear that gripped me. Shadows lunged at the edges of my vision, trying to pull me into the darkness. But I forced my focus. The mansion's pulse grew erratic, walls groaning, chandeliers swinging violently. Suddenly, a figure, Thomas Ellsworth, spectral and terrifying, emerged from the shadows. He spoke, voice echoing, layered with dozens of whispers. You cannot leave until you understand. The mansion judges all who enter, fail, and be claimed. My heart pounded in my chest. I realized that his warning was literal. The mansion didn't just remember. It judged, and failure meant assimilation, becoming part of the structure itself. I steadied myself, reciting passages from the book, following each instruction precisely. The shadows surged, screaming, swirling around me like a storm. Candles ignited spontaneously, illuminating the chamber with eerie light. Symbols on the floor burned brighter with each step I completed correctly. The mansion's pulse slowed, then shifted, syncing with my heartbeat. Then silence. I opened my eyes. The shadows had vanished, leaving the chamber calm, the sigil glowing softly. Thomas Ellsworth's figure remained, faint, observing. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and then dissipated into nothingness. I collapsed to my knees, heart racing, lungs burning. I had survived, or so I thought. The mansion, however, was not done. From above, I heard doors slamming, floors groaning, and whispers continuing in a lower, insistent tone. This is only the beginning. The house chooses. The house remembers. I knew then that I hadn't defeated the mansion. I had only passed its first test. The deeper secrets, the true heart of its power, still awaited. Exhausted, but determined, I ascended the spiral staircase leading out of the chamber. Each step echoed unnaturally, shadows stretching along the walls, watching. I emerged into the main hall, locket and book still in hand. The mansion seemed calmer now, but every instinct told me it was only the calm before the storm. I paused, listening. The whispers had not left. They were everywhere now, beneath the floor, behind the walls, in the air itself. The mansion had acknowledged me as a participant, a witness, a potential inheritor of its dark legacy. I knew I could leave, but part of me understood that the mansion's story was now my story, and the mansion never forgot. The sun began to rise outside, light piercing the windows. Yet, inside, the mansion remained alive, patient, watching. I realized, with a chill that ran down to my core, that no matter how far I walked, no matter how many doors I closed behind me, the mansion's pulse would always be with me. Its whispers would never cease. Its judgment was ongoing. And I knew, deep down, that this was far from over. The mansion's corridors stretched endlessly before me, shadows dancing along the walls as though they had a life of their own. I had stopped trying to measure time. Hours could be minutes. Minutes could be hours. The mansion did not obey logic, and it refused to bend to my understanding. The air was thick, every breath tasting like damp earth and something faintly metallic. Somewhere deep within, I could hear a low, almost imperceptible thrum, like the mansion's own heartbeat, steady, unyielding, patient. I moved carefully, my flashlight cutting narrow beams through the darkness, illuminating the ornate decay around me. Portraits lined the walls, their eyes following me with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. Each face seemed to flicker in the corners of my vision, expressions shifting ever so slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. I realized then that the mansion remembered every step I had taken, every movement, every thought. It catalogued me, studied me, and, I suspected, judged me. I paused at the top of a grand staircase, one that spiraled impossibly high into the darkness above. The banister was carved with twisting vines and faces, some human, some grotesque, all staring with eyes that seemed almost alive. A faint whisper drifted through the air, brushing against my ears. "You are close, closer than you know." At the landing, a set of double doors loomed ahead. They were blackened oak, edged with intricate symbols that glowed faintly in my flashlight's beam. I reached for the handles, cold metal under my trembling fingers, and hesitated. Behind those doors, I sensed the heart of the mansion, the place where its secrets were stored, the source of its unnatural presence. Taking a deep breath, I pushed them open. Inside was a chamber so vast it defied comprehension. The walls disappeared into shadow, the ceiling vaulted high above, and the floor was covered in a mosaic of symbols and runes that pulsed faintly, with a strange energy. In the center stood a pedestal, and atop it, a book bound in black leather, enormous and ancient. Its surface was etched with symbols that seemed to writhe as I looked at them, alive in some impossible, supernatural way. As I approached, the air grew colder, heavier, and I felt the first touch of true fear since entering the mansion. The whispers became voices, a chorus of urgent, overlapping tones that filled the room, vibrating through my chest, through my very bones. Do you understand? Do you understand? Do you belong? The shadows around me began to move independently, twisting into shapes almost human, almost alive. I felt my legs weaken, my hands shake, yet something compelled me forward. I placed my hands on the book's surface. It was warm, pulsing, almost like a living thing. The whispers coalesced into a single voice, deep and resonant. Only those who comprehend may survive. Flipping through the pages, I saw diagrams, symbols, and instructions detailing rituals, bindings, and invocations. Some pages described the mansion itself, a sentient entity created and maintained over generations by the Ellsworth family. Others detailed methods for communicating with its spirits, commanding the shadows, and traversing hidden chambers. My head spun. It was all real, more real than anything I had ever known. Suddenly, a figure materialized from the shadows. Thomas Ellsworth, spectral and terrifying, his eyes glowing faintly. Voice layered with dozens of whispers. The mansion chooses its own. Fail, and you are claimed. My heart pounded violently. The shadows surged, surrounding me, pressing against my perception, bending the space around me. I realized then that failure here would not simply mean death, it would mean assimilation. Becoming one with the house, trapped in the shadows, catalogued forever. I steadied myself, recalling the instructions from the red book and the journal I had found in the basement. I had to follow the sequence exactly, lighting candles in the correct order, tracing the runes with deliberate precision, speaking words aloud despite the fear constricting my throat. The shadows lashed at the edges of my vision, but I forced my focus. Every movement mattered. Every choice could be the difference between survival and being claimed. The mansion seemed to respond to my actions. The pulsing of the symbol slowed, the shadows hesitated, and the whispers became less chaotic, more structured. I followed the sequence, moving with purpose until finally the last candle ignited spontaneously. The room trembled violently, walls vibrating, chandeliers swinging, but then the chaos stopped. Silence descended like a shroud. The figure of Thomas Ellsworth nodded once, faintly, then dissipated into the air. The shadows retreated, leaving the chamber calm. Yet every instinct told me this calm was temporary. I had passed the first trial, but the mansion's core still awaited. It still watched, patient and unyielding, waiting to judge my next step. I descended another spiral staircase, this one hidden behind a false wall I had uncovered using the clues in the book. The stairs led to a subterranean passage, cold and damp, walls lined with ancient relics and objects too old to identify. I could hear whispers here too, lower now, more insistent, almost like a heartbeat in rhythm with the mansion itself. At the end of the passage, I found a door, small and iron-bound. A strange energy emanated from behind it, warm and heavy, almost alive. I pushed it open. The chamber beyond was circular, with a high-vaulted ceiling, and in the center, a sigil etched into the stone floor, glowing faintly. Candles, arranged meticulously, cast dancing shadows on the walls. The locket I had found earlier pulsed with light, guiding me, directing me toward the center. I stepped forward. Shadows rose along the walls, forming humanoid shapes that twisted and writhed, their eyes glowing faintly. The mansion's whispers became a roar. Choose, understand, survive. My hands shook as I followed the sequence, lighting the remaining candles, tracing the final runes, reciting the incantations from memory. The shadows surged, pressing against me, but I forced myself to continue. A tremendous roar shook the chamber, walls vibrating as though the mansion itself were alive. The symbols on the floor burned brighter, and the locket glowed intensely. The shadows screamed and recoiled, then vanished. Silence fell. I fell to my knees, lungs burning, hands trembling. I had survived, at least for now. But as I rose, I understood something chilling. The mansion's story was far from over. I had survived a trial, but the true heart of its power, the essence of its sentience, remained untouched. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before it called upon me again. The mansion did not forget, it did not forgive, and it waited patiently, relentlessly, for the next chapter. The mansion had changed since I first arrived. Shadows now moved independently, almost freely, bending the light and the walls in ways that defied logic. Even in the daylight that now filtered through the dusty windows, the air felt heavy, pregnant with the weight of centuries. I realized, with a shiver that ran deep into my bones, that leaving this place would not be simple. The mansion did not allow escape. It only allowed continuation. My story, my existence, had been folded into its own, and every step I took was catalogued, judged, and measured. I made my way to the main hall, where the grand staircase wound impossibly toward the upper floors. The portraits lining the walls now seemed almost alive, expressions shifting subtly, whispering among themselves in voices just below audible. One of the portraits, a young woman in a pale blue dress, eyes piercing and alive, seemed to lock her gaze on me. I froze. It was the same woman from the locket I had found, the one that had guided me through the mansion's darkest passages. A pulse of cold ran down my spine. The mansion remembered her, and in remembering, it remembered me. I continued upward cautiously, each step echoing unnaturally. The air grew colder, the whispering louder. The shadows twisted along the walls, following me, stretching like dark smoke. My flashlight flickered, then stabilized, illuminating a hallway lined with doors I had never noticed before. Each door radiated a strange energy, some warm, some cold, some pulsating as though alive. One door at the end of the hall drew me in. Its surface was etched with strange runes, faintly glowing in response to my presence. The mansion's pulse seemed to quicken as I approached. I hesitated, hand hovering over the handle. Then, almost imperceptibly, a whisper urged, "This is the heart, the truth. Face it." I turned the handle and stepped inside. The room was enormous, circular, the ceiling vaulted impossibly high. Shadows clustered along the walls, writhing, whispering, pressing against reality itself. In the center of the room was a pedestal, upon which rested a book larger than any I had seen, bound in black leather edged with symbols that seemed alive. Candles flickered in a circle around the pedestal, casting eerie light across the chamber. The moment I stepped forward, the mansion seemed to exhale. The shadows surged inward, pressing around me, their whispers rising to a cacophony. Understand. Survive, join. I felt my legs weaken, but the locket in my hand pulsed, guiding me, anchoring me to the sequence of actions I had learned. This was the mansion's ultimate trial: comprehension, focus, and courage under pressure. I opened the book. The pages contained incantations, symbols, and diagrams, rituals that described the mansion itself as a living, sentient entity. I realized that every shadow, every whisper, every shift in the walls was intentional. The mansion was not merely haunted. It was a conscious, sentient being, created and bound over generations by the Ellsworth family. Their rituals, their obsessions, had made it what it was: an entity that judged, manipulated, and claimed those who entered its walls. Suddenly, the shadows coalesced into figures, each resembling a member of the Ellsworth family as I had seen in the portraits and photographs. Thomas Ellsworth appeared first, spectral, terrifying, his voice layered with dozens of whispers. The house chooses. It remembers. It judges. Behind him, others formed: servants, children, women in flowing dresses, all watching, all observing, all waiting. The room trembled. Candles flickered violently, shadows stretching impossibly. The mansion's pulse had become a roar, vibrating through the floor, the walls, the very air. I realized that this was the climax, the moment when the mansion's power would be fully revealed, and I would either survive or be claimed. I followed the instructions in the book meticulously, tracing runes, lighting candles in precise order, reciting passages aloud despite the fear constricting my throat. Each action caused the shadows to surge, retreat, then circle me again. I felt the mansion probing my mind, testing my resolve, judging my comprehension. My heartbeat synchronized with the mansion's pulse. Failure would be immediate, absolute. Then the spectral figures began to move toward me, gliding across the floor without touching it. Their faces were contorted, almost human yet not, eyes glowing faintly, pleading, commanding, observing. Thomas Ellsworth's figure spoke again. Only those who understand may survive, fail, and become part of us, forever. I steadied myself, reciting the final incantation from the book. The room shook violently, shadows twisting into impossible shapes, walls bending outward, ceiling stretching impossibly high. The locket pulsed with blinding light, guiding me, anchoring me. I finished the sequence, tracing the final symbols with deliberate precision, speaking the words aloud, even as the shadows surged and the whispers screamed. The chamber erupted in light and sound. Shadows screamed, twisting violently before vanishing completely. The figures of Thomas Ellsworth and the others faded, leaving the room silent, calm, yet charged with a residual energy that hummed in my bones. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted, lungs burning, hands trembling. I had survived the mansion's ultimate trial, but the mansion itself did not vanish. Its pulse, though quieter, remained. Its whispers lingered, soft but insistent. The story continues. The house remembers. I knew then that survival was not the same as freedom. I had passed a trial, but the mansion's story would continue with me in it. Its memory, its judgment, its presence were now part of my own reality. I rose, shaky but determined, stepping carefully toward the exit. Sunlight streamed faintly through the windows, though the mansion's interior remained shadowed. Alive, I realized that I could leave physically, but a part of me, the knowledge, the fear, the understanding would always remain. The mansion had claimed a piece of my mind, my perception, my very being. As I finally stepped out into the daylight, the air sharp and cool against my skin, I glanced back. The mansion loomed silently, patient, watching. Its walls, shadows, and whispers would never forget me. I had survived, yes, but the mansion's story and now mine were inextricably linked. The legacy of the Ellsworths, the living, breathing mansion, and the secrets buried within would follow me forever. And in the quiet of that morning, I knew with a chilling certainty, this was not the end. It was only the beginning of a deeper, darker story, one that would continue as long as the mansion remembered. The sun had begun its slow ascent, painting the horizon with pale streaks of gold. But inside the mansion, light seemed foreign, almost intrusive. The shadows remained, subtle and watchful, curling along the walls and ceiling like living smoke. I understood then that the mansion had changed me, irrevocably. My steps were cautious, every movement measured. The echoes of my own heartbeat seemed small compared to the rhythm that pulsed through the house. It was alive, patient, waiting. I made my way to the main hall once more. The portraits lining the walls seemed calmer now, yet they were far from neutral. Faces that had once glared or twisted in eerie expressions now observed silently, almost approvingly. It was as if passing the trials in the chambers below and the rituals above had earned a grudging acknowledgement from the mansion itself. But acknowledgement did not equal freedom. I could feel that much in my bones. I approached the grand staircase. Its wooden steps worn smooth by decades, perhaps centuries, of footsteps, some human, some something else. Each step creaked, and the whispers, now lower, more deliberate, seemed to follow me up. Remember, understand. The house chooses, they murmured. The mansion had not forgotten me. It would never forget anyone who had entered its walls. And now it had integrated a part of my consciousness into its own rhythm. At the top of the staircase, I reached the corridor that had led me to the upper chambers, the rooms where I had first sensed the mansion's sentience. Doors I had previously ignored now pulsed faintly with energy, as though alive. I hesitated outside one particularly ornate door. Black oak etched with symbols I had seen only in the oldest books. The mansion's pulse quickened as I stood there, sensing the unseen eyes that watched from behind walls, from within the shadows, from the very fabric of the building itself. I opened the door. The chamber beyond was vast, circular, and domed, much like the central ritual room I had encountered earlier. In its center lay a massive sigil etched into the stone floor, glowing softly with residual energy. Round it, symbols and artifacts were scattered, seemingly waiting. I stepped inside cautiously, noting that the shadows moved differently here. They didn't just follow me, they anticipated me. The locket pulsed in my hand, guiding me forward. I placed it carefully at the center of the sigil, aligning it with the intricate carvings on the floor. Immediately, the mansion's pulse intensified. Shadows rose along the walls, spiraling toward the ceiling. Whispers escalated into voices, overlapping, urgent, commanding, understand, survive, claim. Then a figure formed before me, unmistakably human in outline, but composed entirely of shadows. It was Thomas Ellsworth, spectral and terrifying, eyes glowing faintly. A layered chorus of whispers emanating from his form. "You have come far," he said, voice resonating across the chamber. You understand more than most. Yet comprehension alone does not free you. I clenched my jaw and spoke aloud, recounting the steps from the book, reciting the incantations with deliberate precision. The mansion responded immediately. The shadows recoiled, the whispers changed tone, and the sigil on the floor glowed brighter, resonating with the locket. The figure of Thomas shifted, almost approvingly. You are close, but the final trial remains. The floor trembled beneath me. Symbols and runes that had lain dormant began to shimmer and shift. From the edges of the chamber, shadows surged, forming humanoid shapes, family members, servants, children, all spectral, all watching, all waiting. I realized that the mansion had summoned its accumulated essence, the remnants of every soul that had passed through its halls, every life it had touched, every ritual that had bound it into being. Fear surged, but I forced myself to focus. I followed the final sequence in the book, tracing runes, lighting candles in precise order, reciting passages aloud, aligning the locket perfectly with the sigil. Each movement caused the shadows to surge, then recoil, then stabilize. The mansion was alive, and it was testing me, judging me, integrating me into its ancient memory. Suddenly, a force struck me, pressing against my chest, attempting to knock me off balance. The shadows surged violently, their whispers screaming in 1,000 layered voices. Fail. Become ours. I stumbled, nearly dropping the locket, but forced myself upright. I remembered the words from the journal. The house listens. It waits, only understanding grants passage. I completed the sequence. The locket emitted a blinding pulse of light. Shadows screamed, writhing violently before dissolving into mist. The chamber shook, the vaulted ceiling quivering, walls groaning. I dropped to my knees, heart pounding, gasping for breath. And then the room fell silent. The mansion's pulse slowed, becoming steady again, almost contemplative. The sigil glowed faintly, but no shadows remained. The figures of Thomas Ellsworth and the others had vanished. I had passed the final trial, not by defeating the mansion, but by understanding it, by synchronizing my actions with its will, by surviving the judgment. I rose slowly. The locket still pulsed faintly in my hand. I stepped toward the doorway, noticing for the first time the subtle changes in the mansion. Doors aligned differently. Corridors appeared clearer. Shadows receded. The mansion was still alive, but it had acknowledged me as one who comprehended its nature. Its whispers persisted, soft now, almost contemplative. Remember, survive, integrate. I descended the staircase cautiously, making my way toward the main entrance. Each step was deliberate, aware of the mansion's presence. As I reached the front hall, I glanced back. The massive, wrought iron doors loomed silently. For the first time, they felt passable. The mansion allowed me to leave, but I understood that I had not truly escaped. A piece of it, the knowledge, the understanding, the memory would always remain within me. I stepped outside. The morning sun bathed the estate in light, birds chirping faintly in the distance, wind rustling through the overgrown gardens. The mansion loomed silently, patient and eternal. I took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill my lungs, but I also felt the mansion's pulse within me, a faint rhythm, a reminder, a connection that would never sever. The story of the Ellsworth mansion had claimed me in part, but I had survived. I had understood its secrets, walked its shadows, faced its ancient judgment, and endured. And as I walked away from the estate, I knew with chilling certainty the mansion's story would continue, and my own story would forever be intertwined with its dark, living memory. The mansion watched, it waited, and it remembered. Weeks had passed since I left the mansion, or perhaps it was months. I could no longer tell. Time had lost its meaning, warped like the corridors within that ancient estate. The world outside seemed normal, but inside me, everything had shifted. The mansion's pulse, faint but persistent, echoed within my mind. Even in sunlight, I could feel it, an unrelenting rhythm reminding me that I had been marked, integrated, understood. I tried to speak of it, to explain what I had experienced to anyone who would listen, friends, strangers, even my own reflection, but no words could capture the true weight of the place. They all looked at me with confusion, skepticism, or pity. The mansion was mine to carry alone. Its shadows, whispers, and memories had followed me, invisible, but undeniable. I could feel them in the quiet of my apartment, in the flicker of lights, in the echo of creaking floorboards I did not have. At night, dreams overtook me. I would walk through corridors that did not exist in the waking world, passing doors I had never seen, glimpsing rooms filled with spectral figures, each silently observing, judging. The locket remained with me, a small, heavy reminder of the mansion's sentience. Its pulse, faint but real, matched the rhythm I had begun to feel inside myself. Sometimes, I could swear I heard whispers from it, murmuring secrets in a language I almost understood. Just at the edge of comprehension, I began to realize the mansion's true legacy. It was not just a place, not merely a structure, but a living, breathing consciousness. A consciousness that spanned generations, collecting knowledge, souls, obsessions, and fears. It had watched families rise and fall, observed their deeds and failures, and recorded them in shadows and whispers. I had not escaped it. I had been integrated into it, a part of its memory, a participant in its ongoing story, despite the fear, despite the knowledge that I would never be free of it. I felt, understanding. The mansion's pulse had become a guide, a framework for my perception of the world. Shadows and light, whisper and silence, presence and absence, they were all intertwined now, and I had learned to navigate them, to observe, to listen, to act deliberately. As I had in the chambers of that house, one evening, I returned to the place in my mind where the mansion's corridors converged. In this inner vision, I walked again through the grand hall, past the portraits whose eyes followed me, and into the circular chamber where I had faced the final trial. The sigil remained at the center, glowing softly. Shadows swirled, but did not threaten. They were neutral observers now, like the mansion itself had recognized my survival, my comprehension, my endurance. I realized, painfully and beautifully, that survival was more than physical. It was mental, spiritual, even moral. The mansion demanded understanding, required patience, and judged not just actions, but intent. Those who entered unprepared were consumed. Those who survived were changed forever. And I had survived. Yet, the mansion's voice, faint and patient, remained. Remember, witness, continue. I understood that I was now a guardian of sorts, a participant in its ongoing legacy. The mansion did not sleep. Its consciousness was eternal, and it would always remember the footsteps, the whispers, and the lives it touched. Even now, months after leaving, I feel its influence. Sometimes I wake in the night, hearing the faintest creak of a floorboard, the softest whisper in a language almost lost. I know it is not imagination. I know it is the mansion reaching through distance and time, ensuring that I never forget. Its story has become inseparable from my own, and yet there is resolve. I have learned the mansion's language, its rhythms, its expectations. I have survived its judgment, walked through its corridors, faced its shadows, and endured its trials. And though it waits, patient and eternal, I have learned to move with its pulse, to navigate its influence, and to understand, in ways no one else could, the living, breathing entity that is the Ellsworth Mansion. The mansion is still out there, silent but alive, watching, judging, waiting. But I have survived. I have understood. And in that understanding, there is power, however quiet, however restrained. The world outside continues, oblivious to the dark consciousness that lies in wait among the decaying walls, among the whispers and shadows, and I walk among it, forever changed, forever marked, a living witness to the mansion's eternal legacy. Some nights, I feel a pull, faint but insistent, a whisper, return, and I know, deep in my soul, that one day I may go back, not because I am compelled, but because understanding is never complete, and the mansion story is far from finished. Until that day, I live in the shadow of its memory, aware, vigilant, and changed forever. The mansion watches, always, and I remember. The mansion loomed silently behind me, its silhouette etched against the pale morning sky. Yet I could feel its pulse deep within my chest. I had survived its trials, understood its secrets, and endured the judgment of shadows that had haunted generations. And yet, the knowledge of its sentience weighed heavily. The house had not released me. It had integrated me. I was now part of its story, a thread woven into centuries of obsession, ritual, and watchful memory. I entered the grounds one last time, compelled to confront the truth fully. Overgrown gardens whispered with the wind, windows reflected the rising sun, and the ancient gates creaked faintly, as though acknowledging my presence. The mansion seemed calm, almost serene. But I knew better. Calmness here was not peace. It was patience. The mansion waited, always, for those who would step across its threshold unaware. I could feel its eyes in every shadow, every brush of wind, every flicker of light. The front doors, massive and blackened with age, stood open. I walked inside, feet echoing on worn stone floors. The portraits lining the hallways seemed softer now, yet each face held centuries of memory, judgment, and expectation. I moved toward the central staircase, tracing the path I had taken countless times in the weeks and months since first arriving. The mansion's pulse matched my own, and I realized that I had learned to move with it, not against it. At the top of the staircase, I reached the hall that led to the final chambers. The doors, etched with runes and symbols, glowed faintly. I paused, hand hovering over the handle. I knew that crossing this threshold again was unnecessary for survival, yet necessary for understanding. With a deep breath, I opened the doors and entered. The chamber beyond was vast and circular, vaulted and lined with shelves of ancient tomes, artifacts, and candles still burning faintly as if untouched by time. In the center lay the sigil, carved into stone and pulsing softly. Shadows swirled along the walls, alive, attentive. But they no longer surged or threatened. They moved in rhythm, in sync with the mansion and now, with me. The locket in my hand pulsed faintly. I placed it at the center of the sigil, and immediately, the chamber responded. Light spiraled along the walls, illuminating symbols, inscriptions, and diagrams that had once terrified me. I recognized each one now, understood each one. The mansion's whispers became comprehensible, its voice coherent. You have seen, you have endured, you have understood. Thomas Ellsworth's spectral figure appeared, composed entirely of shadow and light, eyes glowing softly. Few survive with comprehension, fewer still understand. You have faced the house, endured its judgment, and learned its ways. Yet remember, this is not freedom, it is integration. You walk in its shadow, always. I nodded, understanding at last. The mansion's true nature was not to destroy, but to teach, to catalog, to endure through those who entered its domain. Its legacy was eternal, a consciousness built on centuries of memory, obsession, and ritual. The house was alive, and I had become part of its story. As I turned to leave, shadows moved aside, guiding me to the staircase. I descended slowly, each step deliberate, aware of the presence that now accompanied me. The mansion no longer whispered threats, but offered clarity. I could leave physically, yes, but I could never leave mentally. Its memory, its pulse, its judgment were within me. I had survived, yes, but survival carried the cost of understanding. Outside, the gardens glimmered in the morning light. Birds chirped, wind rustled leaves. But the mansion remained a living entity behind me, patient, eternal, and ever watchful. I felt the connection now, faint but unbreakable, a thread between me and its consciousness. I could walk away, yet I would always remember, always hear its whispers, always feel its pulse. The world beyond the estate continued, oblivious to the dark intelligence lurking in the decayed walls, the shadows that moved with intent, and the legacy of the Ellsworth family. And I, changed irrevocably, carried it with me, a witness, a survivor, and a participant in its eternal story. The mansion had claimed me, yes, but not in body. It had claimed my mind, my understanding, my awareness. And in that claim, I discovered clarity, vigilance, and an unshakable respect for the house's power. As I walked away, I felt its gaze following me, patient, measured, eternal. The mansion would wait, always, for the next footsteps, the next whispers, the next story to be folded into its legacy. And I knew, with certainty both chilling and profound, that its story was far from over. I had survived. I had understood. And the mansion remembered.